Lakota chief tended a war memorial no one else remembered. A settler girl knelt and was loved. The stones were cold. I remember that first. Not the date, not the season, not what I had eaten that morning or whether the fire was still going back at camp. I remember the cold coming up through my knees into my hands as I set the first rock back in its place. A field stone the size of a man's fist. Granite, pale gray, with one side darker where the frost had sat on it all night. I had found it 3 feet from where it belonged, carried there by the hooves of cattle that did not know what ground they were crossing. It was before sunup, not unusual for me. At 62 you wake before you mean to. You lie in the dark listening to your own breathing, and you think about things that cannot be fixed, and then you get up. I had put those stones there myself, or helped. It was a long time ago. 12 warriors from our band who had fallen before I was old enough to hold a rifle. Some of them I had known only as shapes in stories, my father's words, my uncle's silences, but the names I knew every name. There were 11 of them by the time I arrived that morning. The 12th had been dragged off to some distant corner of the field. I couldn't find it in the dark, and I set a temporary stone in its place, a rough one, not the right one, so the circle would be whole while the light came up. I heard her before I saw her. Not a loud sound. Just the particular hesitation of a person who doesn't know whether she should be where she is. A boot finding soft ground. A small correction of weight. I did not turn. I kept my hands on the stones and let her figure it out herself. She was 20-something, maybe 25. She had come from some distance, you could tell by the road dust still in her collar, and the particular way she held herself when she was tired, a slight forward lean that she wasn't aware of. Blue eyes the color of shallow water, hair the kind of brown that goes blonde at the edges in summer, a canvas bag over one shoulder, nearly empty now. She said nothing at first, just stood at the edge of the ring and looked. After a while she asked what it was. I told her, a warrior's memorial, old. And I told her the rough number of years, which stopped her cold. She asked who had put it there. I said some of it was me, and some of it was my father, and some of it was men who were gone now. She asked if these were the names of the dead carved into the stones. They were not carved, the names were not written at all, they were held in me. That was the whole point. Writing a thing down is a way of forgetting it. When it is in the stone, you stop carrying it. I had been carrying these names for 40 years. I did not want to put them down. She stood there a while longer. Then without asking she knelt, right there at the edge of the ring, both knees, not awkward about it, just down. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She was not praying, not in the way settlers pray, hands folded, eyes shut, lips moving. She was just there, present, looking at each stone in the circle with the particular attention of someone who understands that she is in the presence of something she does not fully understand, and who is not trying to change that. That is rarer than it sounds. Her name was Marin. She told me later, not that morning. That morning we just worked. After she knelt and looked, she saw that 2 of the stones on the east side had shifted slightly, probably the same cattle, and she asked with her hands whether they should be here or here, and I showed her, and she moved them. She did not ask why the spacing was what it was. She didn't ask about the orientation, the direction they faced, the significance of the circle. She just moved the stones where I showed her and then sat back on her heels and looked at the whole thing. When the sun came fully up, she pulled a canteen from her bag and held it out to me. I drank. She drank. She left before midday, walked back toward wherever she had come from. I found out later she had been camped 2 miles east on her way through, a woman traveling alone, which was unusual enough in those years to make the town talk. I did not ask where she was going. I did not ask her to stay. But she came back. 3 days later, same time of morning, just before first light. I was already at the memorial because I was always at the memorial, twice a week if the weather held, once a week when it didn't. pulling weeds at the base of the stones, checking the alignment, sitting sometimes, just sitting, holding the names in my mind one by one the way you'd count livestock, not because you've forgotten the number, but because the counting is itself the act of care. She came quieter this time, knew the ground better. She brought a small hand trowel. I looked at the trowel, she looked at me, I nodded. We worked for an hour in the dark. She dug out a section where the ground had heaved over the winter and resettled 2 stones that had started to sink. She was careful. She watched how I handled each stone before she touched one, not asking for instruction, but paying attention in the way that people do when they respect what they're doing. When we were done, she sat where she'd sat before and took out something wrapped in cloth. Flatbread, still warm. She set half on the ground beside me. I ate. She ate. The light came up on the plains, that particular light of early spring that is still half winter, pale, low, sideways, everything in it too bright and too cold at once. She said, "I'm going to stay a while, in the valley. I've been moving for 2 years and I think this is where I stop." I didn't answer, she didn't seem to need one. I'll tell you what you need to know about who I was by then, not to make it dramatic, just so you understand. I had been a chief, not the kind that foreign men imagine when they picture chiefs, not ceremony, not headdress, not the image they put on tin cans and penny magazines. A chief was a man who people came to when they had trouble, who stood between his people and the thing that wanted to hurt them, who decided when to move and when to stay, when to fight and when to hold, who was responsible. I had done that for 20 years, through the worst of it, the years when the buffalo were going and the land was going and the promises were going, and the people were starting to understand that none of it was coming back. By the time Marin found me at that memorial, I was living alone on a piece of ground that had been allotted to me, 40 acres, which sounds like something until you understand that I had ranged 200 miles in every direction for most of my life. The nearest settlement was 4 miles. The nearest person I talked to with any regularity was a Crow man named Joseph who came through twice a month to trade, and we mostly communicated in gestures and shared silence, both of us having lived long enough to know that words were mostly for people who still had something to prove. I was not unhappy, I want to be honest about that. Grief and unhappiness are not the same thing. I grieved. For the dead at that memorial and for the other dead, and for the way things had gone and for the life that had been and would not be again. But I had found a way to carry it that did not break me. The memorial was part of that, the work of it. What I did not have, had not had for a long time, was anyone who saw me. Not the chief, not the old warrior, the living relic, the dignified remnant of a thing the settlers had already decided was finished. Just me. The man who got up before dawn and put stones back in their places and carried 12 names in his chest like embers. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen that way. Marin reminded me. She did not romanticize me. That is important. I have known people who thought they were honoring me by making me something larger than I was, the noble vanishing man, the last of his kind, all of that. Marin had no patience for it. She was not a soft woman. She had been moving alone for 2 years. Before that, a life in a city that had become unbearable in ways she told me about slowly, over many months, the way you drain a wound. Her father, a man she had believed in. The particular cruelty of someone who seems good, until they don't have to seem good anymore. She had come west to find ground that was hers. She found it in that valley. She built a small house. Not a soddy. She found a creek with a good bank and she built against it with stone, which took her most of the summer. I helped when I could, which was more than she had counted on. I am a big man still, even at 62. The size has not entirely left me, and I know stone. That is what 40 years of maintaining a memorial teaches you. How stone sits, how it settles, how to read whether a course is true. She would watch me sometimes when she thought I wasn't noticing. Standing in the door of the half-finished house with a cup of water, watching me lift a little stone she'd been struggling with all morning. Not the way a woman watches a useful thing, the way she watches a man she is trying to understand. I let her look. I was not young. I was not the man I had been. There is a particular loss that comes at 60 that is hard to describe to anyone who hasn't reached it yet. Not loss of strength exactly, though that is real, but loss of the feeling that strength buys you time. When you are young and strong, you live in a kind of faith that there is more. More season, more fight, more chance to make the thing right. At 60, you know the arithmetic. You count differently. I had counted myself out of certain things. A woman was one of them. Not because I had decided it was impossible, but because I had stopped imagining it the way you stop imagining snow in July. Not forbidden, just not part of the weather anymore. Marin changed the weather. The first time she came to the memorial with me, not finding me there by accident, but asking if she could come, walking beside me in the dark. I told her the 12 names. All 12. In Lakota first, then translated as well as I could into English, because some things don't cross exactly. She listened to each name the way you listen to something you intend to remember, not nodding along, not filling the silence, just taking them in. When I finished, she sat with it for a long time. Then she said, "Tell me one thing about each of them, one true thing." So I did. 12 men, 12 things. Some of them I knew from stories, some from memory. One from a single afternoon when I was 7 years old, and a man named Lakota had let me hold his rifle and shown me how the mechanism worked. And he had smelled of wood smoke and horse and something else I couldn't name. And he had died 2 winters later in a fight I was too young to be part of. By the time I finished, the sun was fully up. Marin had her hands in her lap. She looked at the ring of stones and she said quietly, "I'll remember them too now." I did not say anything. I could not quite. There was a day in late summer when 2 men from the settlement came to tell me the land question had been sorted. Sorted against me, as it turned out, a strip along the east side of my 40 acres that a man named Burkett had been claiming since spring. The paper they showed me was in order. The law was clear. The strip was his. I listened to them explain it. They were not cruel about it, just the particular discomfort of men delivering news they know is wrong but are delivering anyway because it is their job, and the paper is in order, and they have families and debts, and the paper is in order. I thanked them, they left. I sat outside a long time. Marin came in the evening. She had heard these things travel. She came and sat beside me on the step and did not say anything useful and did not try to. That is the thing about her. She knows when words would be an insult to the size of a thing. After a while, she put her hand over mine. Just that, her hand. Warm, calloused from the stone work. She had broken a nail down to nothing on the lintel stone, and it had grown back crooked, and she just let it. She was not a woman who spent much energy on the state of her hands. I turned my hand over and held hers. We sat there until the dark came in. Later, not that night later, I asked her why she stayed. Not in the valley, which I understood, but with me. An old man with a strip of stolen land and 12 names to carry and no community left to lead and no particular promise of anything. She looked at me for a long moment, the way she looked when she was deciding whether a thing was worth the words. Then she said, "Because I have been around men who could not be trusted with their own weight. You carry yours. I have never seen you put it down on anyone else, not once, and you tend to your dead. A man who tends to his dead is a man who knows what things are worth." She said it plain, no sentimentality in it, a statement of fact from a woman who had done the arithmetic and arrived at a conclusion. I held on to that. I hold on to it still. There is a kind of cold that comes to the plains in September that has nothing in common with winter cold. Winter cold is a thing that settles. September cold is a thing that moves through, a wind off somewhere distant, carrying the information that the world is about to change. You feel it at your back walking. You feel it in the stones. We were at the memorial on one of those September mornings, both of us like we often were by then. She had her own rhythm with the place now different from mine, not better or worse. She pulled weeds on the south side, I checked the stones on the north. Sometimes one of us would sit while the other worked. There was no performance in it, just two people taking care of a thing. That morning I found the missing stone. The 12th. I had never stopped looking for it. 2 years of checking the corners of the field and the far edges of the cattle ground. And there it was, half sunk in a low spot near the fence line, grass grown over it so thorough you'd only find it if you knew it was there. I pulled it free. It took both hands. 3 pounds of granite, pale gray, one side darker from sitting face down in the wet ground all those years. I carried it back to the ring. Marin had stopped working. She watched me cross the field with the stone in my hands. She did not say anything. She understood what it was. I set it back in its place, the last one, the circle complete. I stood back and looked at it. Then I did something I had not done in a very long time. I spoke all 12 names aloud. Not to Marin, not to anyone in particular. Just aloud to the morning, to the cold air moving across the plains. 12 names, 12 times a breath before the next. When I finished, Marin was beside me. She had moved quietly, the way she moves when she doesn't want to interrupt something. She stood to my left, close enough that her shoulder was against my arm. I felt the warmth of her through my coat. I did not look at her. I looked at the completed ring of stones, at the 12th stone back where it belonged, at the light coming sideways through the dry grass, making each stone cast a shadow. She reached up and put her hand against the side of my face. Not like something fragile was being held, like something was being confirmed. The way you press your hand to a wall to check it is solid. I put my hand over hers, kept it there. We stayed like that until the shadows moved. I think about those years now the way you think about water when you've been without it, with a particular gratitude that is also a kind of amazement that the thing exists at all. I had not expected them. At 62, you stop expecting. You accept what you have and you tend it well and you stop looking toward the horizon for things to come from there. The horizon has mostly finished its deliveries. You know that. But I was wrong. A woman came out of the morning dark and knelt in the dirt beside 12 stones and looked at them the way they deserved to be looked at. She came back. She brought a trowel. She learned the names. She stayed. That is the whole of it. It doesn't need to be made larger. I was a man that the world had, in various ways and for various reasons, moved past. Not bitterly. Not with cruelty, mostly. Just the ordinary passage of things. The world moves, you stay still, and after a while the distance between you and what you once were becomes a geography of its own. You live in it, you learn its weather. Marin walked into that geography and looked around and said, "This is where I stop." She saw what was here, not what had been. Not the chief, not the legend, not the record of losses. The man who got up before dawn and kept faith with the dead and put stones back where they belonged and knew how a wall should sit and could be trusted with his own weight. She saw me, and she chose to stay. I will not dress it in anything fancier than that. It is enough, more than enough. The memorial still stands. I tend it and Marin tends it, and when we are both gone, it will stand a while longer before the cattle come through again or the frost works at the stones. That is the nature of things. You build them, you tend them, and then eventually the world covers them over. That is not failure. That is just time. But while you are here, you tend what you have promised to tend. And if a good woman kneels in the dirt beside you and sees what you are doing and stays, you hold her hand. You say her name the way you say the names of the honored dead, with the full weight of it, without apology, certain that some things are worth carrying forever. She is asleep behind me now as I sit here. The fire has been down a long time, just embers. The planes outside are making no sound at all, that particular prairie silence that is not emptiness but is full of things too large and too quiet to name. I should sleep. I will in a moment. First, I want to sit here a little longer with the embers, and the silence, and the 12 names, and the woman in the next room who looked at all of it, and did not look away. A man could count himself lucky. I do.